So we're talking about a former president in more contemporary history. Let's talk about some presidents, some former presidents, more remote in American history, and some other American leaders, and what they may have to think about this situation if they could hop in a time machine. You wrote another recent article called "If You Can Keep It: America's Foundation is Crumbling but Not Lost." And let's touch on a theme we kind of touched on earlier, and it's a sort of this demonic idea of Pride Month, which is this month. Pride Month, I would say, is not about tolerance. It's not just live and let live, right? So, what does the left mean by acceptance?
They mean acceptance in the same sense that, you know, say one of the medieval Vikings might have meant accepting Odin, as you bend over a tree stump with his sword against your throat. Pride Month is really, we have, as Catholics, we have June is the month of the Sacred Heart. When we commemorate and remember and increase our devotion to Christ's Sacred Heart, which is a holy experience. It's a devotion meant to sanctify us. And we have Archbishop Fulton Sheen explained that Satan is the ape of the church. That's a very famous quote from Sheen. Satan is the ape of the church, and so Satan is sort of trying to set up his own anti-church. Much less famously, Monsignor Robert Hugh Benson, in his book The Lord of the World, kind of tries to, back in 1907, tried to kind of anticipate or predict what this anti-church, what this aping of the church might end up looking like. And he comes to the conclusion that even though it's purely atheistic, humanistic, it's worshiping, it's narcissistic, worshiping the self, the human as God, everybody is his own Messiah, that kind of idea, that it eventually necessitates actual liturgical worship. And I think that that's really what we're seeing with something like Pride Month. It is their own holy month. It's sort of like the left-wing Ramadan, the left-wing Lent, the left-wing Advent. It's their holy month, where they praise one of these things that is one of their sacraments, and so I think that really Pride Month has become this evangelistic sort of thing that kind of doesn't so much try to, as Christians may, elevate the mind and reason in order to facilitate conversion to truth, but rather dulls the intellect and subjects reason to appetite and to passion, so that the appetites can then go where they will and can then pursue whatever debauched degeneracy is being favored or promoted this month.
You wrote in your article that Pride Month is not a grassroots achievement, but an innovation of the elite. It seems to me that everyday people don't really want to pay attention to this stuff. If it is at a grassroots level, it's a very, very small minority of people who are affected by this and feel affected by this and feel like they want to rise up and protest or be an activist or whatever. But everyday, common, red-blooded American doesn't want this on their radar. They don't want to hear about it. So, it's interesting because if you were to get out your time machine and transport the founding fathers into contemporary society, what would they say at everything going on? And back then, when they were framing the Constitution, did they have any foresight to prevent these aberrations based on their own intellectual and spiritual formation?
Yeah, I'd say they did. One of the things is the founding fathers were a sort of, I don't want to quite say motley crew, but they were an intellectually and ideologically fairly diverse set of folks. You had, kind of different wings, different factions, but I can tell you, I was actually just reading the other day legislation that had been drafted and proposed by Thomas Jefferson, who was known as kind of the liberals' liberal, very, very kind of, law should kind of let everybody do what they want. It should really only come in at the most serious of times to restrict people's actions, he proposed a law making sodomy, homosexual act, crime punishable by mutilation, physical mutilation. Men would have, fingertips and body parts removed. Women would have, I think it's their nostril cut open for engaging in this. And that was in what, 1780 something. I think that they would be certainly appalled, if they saw what was happening today. And there is this sort of notion, you especially hear it with guns, oh, well, the founding fathers, when they wrote about guns, they only had, flintlock muskets, they didn't know that you were going to end up with, AR-15s or AK-47s, yeah, but like the flintlock muskets is what the army had. They had cannons. The army had cannons. They're basically saying that you should have whatever guns the military has, in case that's what you need to fight. And so I think that there's sort of this false notion that, the founding fathers were sort of, cavemen, that they had no idea that any of this stuff could possibly happen. Yeah, they did. Like they knew about this. Thomas Jefferson wrote about this and wanted to put people who do this in prison. He wanted to mutilate them physically by law. So the idea that they had, oh, well, they never anticipated, the gay rights movement and stuff. Yeah, they did. And they had an answer to it. And just the idea that this has come about now, and the founding fathers anticipated this to some extent, and the kind of government that they gave to us is a government of self-responsibility. It's where you are taking care of yourself. You can look at it as, well, the way that I find it helpful to kind of think of it is, a monarchy is sort of very much kind of like a dad taking care of his children. He has a duty, a respect. Sure, he may be a bad dad. He may be an abusive alcoholic. Sure, maybe. But he knows that what he's supposed to do is take care of his children and raise them and love them and teach them properly and do things so that they prosper. That's his job. That's the monarch's job. The kind of government that we have, that our founding fathers devised, was much more like kind of like the kids have grown up. They're out in the world now. Thanks, Dad, but like, I'll make my own decisions now, I understand, you think that that's best for me right now. It's not, sorry. And that does require a degree of maturity, that spiritual, moral, and intellectual maturity that is completely lacking today. Like we just talked about, we have an entire month essentially mandated to celebrate homosexual sins, homosexual acts, which up until relatively recently, were taboo. You couldn't hint at it. I remember there was a show back in the, I think it was in the 70s, Three's Company. That show?
Yeah. Yep.
This guy was not allowed to, he had to pretend to be, gay and stuff like
to live in the house.
Yeah,
with
to live
with
in
the
the
two
house.
women.
It's insane. They like that this has become as accepted and as mandated as it is, on a broad cultural level, and it's really indicative of the fact that we do not have that moral or intellectual, or certainly not that spiritual maturity, and as you, I think, have been alluding to, it was John Adams, who was our first vice president and our second president. John Adams, who also essentially kind of defended our present system of government and helped really define it as essential. Thomas Paine wanted to eliminate the Senate. He wanted there to be only one chamber of Congress. And it was John Adams who stepped in and said, I'm sorry, but that is far too close to mob rule. We need a bicameral Congress. We need two chambers. So that one can kind of balance out the other. And he was right, because he recognized that there is always the potential to abuse that power if you're morally corrupted. Under different forms of government, moral matters may be uh, legislated. You know, Under our form of government, the American form of government, moral matters were by and large not legislated. You weren't mandated to do this or that or the other thing. They kind of left it up to you and trusted you to shape your conscience, to live a moral life. And we haven't. John Adams said that our Constitution was made for a moral and religious people. It is wholly unsuitable to any other, to the government of any other. We've become that people that it's wholly unsuitable to. We were just talking about pornography. I'm blown away like that my vote counts the same. I'm a husband. I'm now a father. I've overcome a lot in my life. I'm well educated. I'm well trained in classic literature, in classic philosophy, in my Catholic catechism. But my vote counts the exact same as some guy who got a vasectomy, works at not that there's anything wrong with Burger King, but say works at Burger King, right? Spends all of his money on pot and OnlyFans and watches pornography 8 times a day. My vote counts the same as his. That's appalling. That's insulting to me. It's just mental that we've reached this point of moral decay.
Yeah. Yeah, it is real unfortunate to see the country in this state. I don't even want to say headed in this direction because we're already here.
We're there.
We're here. Yeah, we're here, we're there, we're everywhere, unfortunately. We're all over the place. But as you write, all is not lost. All is not lost because the solution is a return to morality and religion. And we ultimately have to remember, too, that even if, God forbid, this great country goes down, we are still citizens of the kingdom of God.